I was surprised with the reason that they gave, the specifics around the platforms, but I wasn't at all surprised with the decision because I think it's very clear that the Bank West and St George takeovers that were allowed in the peak of the GFC caused unprecedented concentration of power in the banking sector, and the capitalisation of the big four banks is now over $300 billion. No other country in the world where 4 of the top 5 companies by capitalisation are banks, and I just think the government don't want the big four banks to get any bigger, and I think that Graham Samuel sniffed the breeze there and also come up with some legitimate reasons, but there's no political support for our big banks becoming any more dominant.
Well, it's interesting, Stephen, because Citigroup analysts came out and fairly bluntly said it seemed to Citigroup that it was a more political decision in an election year. Now, although I note Graham Samuel was very quick to say, you know, he was frustrated that it's being portrayed as just a political decision. He said on their analysis, lessening of competition, that was the rule they applied.
Well, I think it stacks up on both grounds, that there wasn't any political support for it, and we do have a ridiculously dominated banking cartel in Australia where they're making, $25 billion pre-tax. I mean, don't forget there was the original 6 pillars, if you like, when Paul Keating first introduced the 4 pillars policy in 1992. I think it was when he banned ANZ from buying National Mutual, as it was then. And so, I don't think it's surprising that 18 years later, we still have a policy which is the big four banks can't take over one of the 2 traditional big life offices. But interestingly, the regulator is saying that those 2 big life offices, AMP and National Mutual / AXA, can get together themselves to create a so-called 5th pillar. So it's a very, very substantial development, this story.
Yeah, and Cynthia, it's interesting because doesn't it essentially leave the door open for AMP because it was only stopping NAB?
Yeah, well, I'm curious, Stephen, do you think that they are clearly opening the door to AMP? Do you think it's clear that they would let AMP buy AXA? Because there were still some reservations about that deal.
Well, some reservations, but I think when it comes down to it, NAB's market capitalisation is what, $66 billion. The Commonwealth Bank is now worth $92 billion. They are so much more bigger than little old AMP, which is what, $15 billion, and AXA, which is $14 billion. And if you take out the Asia-Pacific element of the listed Australian AXA, you're talking about $7-8 billion. The combination, $21 billion versus NAB as a standalone, $66 billion. I think clearly the big four are in a league of their own. They will not be allowed to swallow up any meaningful competitors. They're too big, they're too strong. Yet numbers 5, 6, 7 and 8, if they want to merge as AMP and AXA might, I think that one will go through, and you will have closer to a 5th pillar in terms of financial service giants in Australia.
Steve, do you think it's almost impossible for NAB to revive it? They're going to have to either let some substantial assets go to get AXA, and will they want to do that? Or do you think really they've got to step back and say, well, we've lost that one?
I think the latter. I think they'd have to compromise or sell too much to get regulatory approval, and then the rationale of the deal would subside. So, look, I think all the big four banks and all of business across Australia, frankly, should read the new environment. Graham Samuel and the ACCC are knocking back deals left, right and centre. The Link Registries, share registry deal, the GUD Breville deal, now this deal, Caltex and Mobil got rolled, and I think BHP and Rio is a goner, and people should get the message that Australia has the most concentrated corporate sector in the world. There's too many duopolies everywhere, and at last the regulator, clearly regretting what he allowed during the GFC, is coming out swinging in the twilight months of his tenure at the ACCC.
All right, so you actually agree with Adam that, it may be he has all but admitted that the decision to allow those takeovers by Westpac and the CBA shouldn't have happened?
Well, he has said publicly that he regrets the speed with which they had to approve those deals, particularly the CommBank Bank West deal, where CommBank got such dominance in the WA market. And he regrets it. And you've just got to look at the market cap of the big four banks. At $305 billion, it's higher than it was at the peak of the market in November 2007. I mean, they are so dominant in 90% of new home loans and even sort of dominance of the funds management industry, when there's obviously this massive conflict of interest between providing debt and providing equity to an economy. So that's what I like about putting AMP and AXA together, is you'll get a giant in funds management, which, you know, 150 billion plus under management, which won't at the same time be trying to sell banking services and loans to the same companies that it owns.
Yeah. Curiously, the market in essence seemed to agree, didn't it? Because after the ACCC rejection, NAB's share price went up, what, 70 cents, about 3%. Now, does that indicate that the market didn't like the deal at all, or that already it was taken into account with the share price?
Well, I think that 70–80% of takeovers destroy value. You know, too often they're driven by ego and empire building, and the market is clearly expressing a view that NAB was intending to pay too much, that it was value destroying, and it rewarded their failure in that sense. And I do think the NAB board ought to have a good look at that and what the regulator is saying, and ask themselves, you know, is it really worth boxing on in this environment when your own investors don't like it, the regulator doesn't like it, and the politicians, I'd suggest, in Canberra don't like it either.